Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in to The Real Talk in Blackburn. Welcome back. We know you've missed us. We have on our panel today two very distinguished and noble gentlemen in the names of Brother Mohammad Shafiq and Brother Shaukat Hussain, Councillor. Some very deep and possibly controversial topics that we're going to discuss today. Firstly, we want to start off with the topic of Pakistan on the red list. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. How are you this evening?
Assalamu alaikum. Walaikum
Walaikum salam. Good to be on. Thank you, Shak.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's good to be on the opposite side, Brother Mohammad Shafiq. On this end, you're making me slightly nervous.
Well, I'm actually nervous. I hope you be gentle. So let's.
I'll try and be gentle, but then on the other end, I've got Brother Shaukat as well, who's just
very
as
gentle.
Good. He's an expert. So
he's an expert. He's an expert.
Interviews.
Yeah,
He's
very experienced in this field, mashallah. And without further ado, we want to talk about Pakistan on the red list. And I want to kickstart off this discussion and ask, what are the British government's reasons for Pakistan being on the red list? If I can start with you, please, Brother Shaukat.
First of all, we're very disappointed because we've got a huge Pakistan heritage community, not just in Blackburn, but the whole country. So we are disappointed that they decided to keep us in the red list. The reasons are quite simple. They're political and economical. That's the main reason. But Pakistan, to be frank, hasn't helped themselves. If you look at the July, when they didn't give any data at all to the United Kingdom government, so it was going to be obvious that they were going to keep them in the red list. Since then, a lot of parliamentarians, a lot of activists have made representation on their behalf in England, and we've had quite a few meetings with the Pakistan ministers as well. We made some progress, but unfortunately, things aren't improving in Pakistan. And the reason, obviously, the reason why we're in red list is because it's a political decision. If you look at India, some of the results in there, Pakistan were doing a lot better than them. But if I'm going to be frank, I think the Pakistanis haven't helped themselves. They haven't made a really strong case. Some of the politicians that I've listened to and talked to keep on referring and dragging India into it, when I think all you need to do is mention it once, the parallels, but then you need to make your own strong case. And today we've got the Foreign Secretary from our government go to Pakistan, primarily to talk about Afghanistan, but it'll be a golden opportunity for the Pakistanis to raise the red list. And I think they should make a very strong case. And I think they should go further and invite some of the scientists from England to go to Pakistan to verify some of the reports on how they're controlling the coronavirus over there.
Thank you, Councillor Shaukat. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate your views and comments. Moving on, Brother Mohammed, what's your take on that?
Well, I think you first of all have to go back a few steps let's talk about the Pakistani government. Up until July, the Pakistani government did not share their data with the British government, and that was a real concern in terms of understanding the testing regime, the positive rate, vaccination rate, and the genomic sequencing, which is really important when it comes to COVID-19, to understand if there's any variants, what's the testing rate, what's the slope, if you like, of that testing regime. Now, that's up until July, so that's on the Pakistani government. They failed. And, if they are so concerned about overseas Pakistanis, they value overseas Pakistanis, then that should have been something they should have done in the run-up and had that engagement and diplomatic relationship with the United Kingdom government. Having said that, I think after July, you saw the Pakistani government release that data to the Department of Health and Social Care in the UK. There's been conversations at bilateral level. We know that, as Shaukat said, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab is in Pakistan tonight. He's there for a 2-day visit. Afghanistan obviously will top those discussions. But Pakistan government officials have told me in the last few hours that they want to see the red list also being discussed. And, let me tell you, the UK Junior Health Minister, Lord Bethel, who had written to the all-party parliamentary group for Pakistan, Yasmin Qureshi, who's the MP for Bolton South East, and Rahman Chisti, who's the MP for Gillingham, the Conservative MP. And it's clear, if you look at the Pakistan positive rate, it has gone up over the last 3 weeks. The COVID deaths are going up. It's going in the wrong direction. And there's people in Pakistan not following the operating request around wearing a mask, social distancing, to having the vaccine. And what they're saying is because they're unable to determine, Pakistan is testing lower numbers, they can't determine the exact makeup of the vaccine. So that, in a nutshell, is what the government here in the UK is saying. But I think there's something else going on here as well that we've got to confront, and that is politics and the economic situation that we find ourselves. In early March, I led a campaign to tell the British government why they hadn't put India on the red list. I had those conversations with various ministers, and they didn't want to do it because Boris Johnson was about to embark on a trade visit, which was billions of pounds post-Brexit, and he didn't want to upset the Indian forces and Indian government. And it was only as a direct result of the massive public uproar that India eventually ended up on the red list 3 weeks after the Delta variant entered the country. And so there's no economics here. There's no rational decision to keep India on the amber list, yet keep Pakistan still on the red list. And the other thing that you've got to notice is 100,000 people daily over the last few days have contracted COVID-19 in the United States. And there's been over 1,000 deaths each day over the last few days. Yet we have lifted the restrictions in terms of American citizens that come to the UK without the need for quarantine, without for those who are double vaccinated. So, if it's about health, if it's based on health, that is something which I would support and encourage. But I don't think it's just about the health. There's lots of economics and politics involved in it as well.
Thank you very much for that, brothers. So, just going on to some of the comments, I'm just going to revert to the screen on the right. Brother Ahmed says, obviously, many families are in trouble due to the red list. Brother Moore is one saying, Asad Umar admitted cases are rising in Pakistan, especially after the elections in AJK. That's why they're still probably on the red list. And he adds that Pakistan should shut its airspace for a month like they did in April 2020. That's a fair point. He talks about the shutting of the airports as they did in April 2020. But I'm going to kind of bring a question into that. Do you think that will help? I mean, there's many British families that are stranded in Pakistan at the moment due to the political reasons that the British government have made, maybe using Pakistan as an excuse. But if you look at, sadly, the deaths that India have faced through COVID, surely there's an uneven sparring being held in there. Councillor Shaukat Saab, what's your take on that?
Well, no, I don't agree with closing the airspace. There's a lot of families definitely stuck. The reason they put people in red or countries in red list is it's a deterrent, and they don't want you to go, basically. And the reason you've got to go in a hotel and pay those extortionate fees is a penalty. That's what it is. They don't want you to go, and if you go, you're going to have to pay the price. And there are families who are stuck. I know some relatives who are stuck in Pakistan at the moment. And I also know some people who had to go because the parents weren't feeling well, they were very ill. They've no choice, so they've gone. So it's unfair on them. So that's what I'm saying. I'm very disappointed for my constituents, if nothing else, that we did find ourselves in this position. But just like Mohammad Shafiq said, British, I read somewhere, they are really concerned about a new variant coming into the country, which the vaccine that most of people have already had 2 jabs of might not be able to fight. So you can understand their case. They don't want to start all these lockdowns all over again and try and find another vaccine for that variant. So you can see where their case is, even though we can argue whether it's political or not. You can see the case, which is why I honestly think that Pakistan need to make a stronger case that they are in control. Their uptake of vaccine isn't brilliant. Uh, Test and trace is non-existent more or less. And like Asad Umar just tweeted today, some of the hospitals are now full and overflowing. So unfortunately, the chrono COVID-19 in Pakistan is on the rise at this moment in time, from what I'm seeing and reading. So that doesn't help.
You know what I would say? I was sorry, just going to interject there and agree with you, but I think we've got to do some self-reflection. When the lockdown started last year, many families had gone over to Pakistan for weddings, for vacations, and they took the Kent variant, for example, which spread in Pakistan. They took that to Pakistan. So up until that point, Pakistan was lauded by the World Health Organization. We were told by the head of the World Health Organization that Pakistan was a beacon when it came to deal with COVID. But what happened was we had all these British families go over, and in some cases they had COVID-19. I'm not generalizing here, but that's what the reality is based on what the Pakistan government have said. And then, it caused a knock-on effect in terms of how you deal with that. And you talked about the experts, the Pakistan and British governments have now established a working group, an expert working group, which is now working through the data and sharing best practice. Two things here. One is we've got to do that self-reflection on ourselves in our community. So those people who went over for family reasons, because a family member was ill or somebody who died, they've got a legitimate reason to go. But people going over for weddings, I think was unacceptable and wrong. And we as a community, we might be paying a price for it. But yes, we can criticize the government. Yes, we can criticize the authorities in Pakistan. But let's look at ourselves. How many of us actually went to Pakistan during that period and didn't follow COVID-19 guidelines in Pakistan? And then the other aspect, which I think is really, really important, is that we are finally seeing ministers take this up seriously at a bilateral level. So we hadn't seen a conversation with Boris Johnson and Imran Khan. Shah Mahmood Qureshi and Dominic Raab hadn't spoken 6 months. In the last 6 months, they hadn't spoken. I find that appalling. The foreign secretary of both countries are not speaking to each other, particularly with what's going on in Afghanistan. And I think the fact that Dominic Raab is there tonight, he's having those conversations, I think is a welcome step. But as Shaukat says, we've got to be very clear why these restrictions are in place. If they're solely for health reasons, then that's fine. I would support them. People in our community have died adversely from this virus. They've been killed, thousands in Blackburn. So many have been killed as a direct result of this virus. So I believe strongly that COVID-19 is real and the consequences are real. And we as a community have suffered massively from that. But again, I come back to this point. We have a government that seems to be making decisions that is based not on fact and health, but also includes economics and politics. And I think that stinks.
Yes.
And so do you think that the results obviously that are coming out of Pakistan at the moment, do you think that they would be mostly fabricated just so that people are trying to get back, or do you think that there's actually some truth in them getting seriously tested to try and get back? Because what we've got to understand is the general public or the British citizens are seriously stranded, and they are in, there's many in dire straits. Some have, like you said, Brother Mohammad Shafiq and Councillor Shaukat Saab, that went for legitimate reasons, but some went for a bit of a jolly, and now are having to obviously face the consequences. So would you say that the government is playing a bit of a vendetta here against the people of Pakistan and the Pakistani government to try and keep them at bay for a little longer? Because if we look at it statistically, the Indian deaths sadly were far greater by percentage and number than the people of Pakistan.
Yeah, but Pakistan was testing less, and that's the concern. India was testing in the hundreds of thousands. Yes, there was more deaths. Yes, there were more positive cases, but their testing was very, very strong. Pakistan was testing very, very strongly when the pandemic started in last March. But in recent days, one of the concerns the government have, and the conversations I've had with the Department of Health have been around the fact that the low testing regime is what's concerning them. One of the safeguards have now been put in place to kind of stop those, because what was happening, I know, because I was in Pakistan last October, and I know that people had amended emails with certificates, to say that they'd been tested and their test was negative. That's all been done away now. You have to have the stricter guidelines through the airlines and governments. And also now at Islamabad Airport, in Lahore Airport and in Karachi Airport, there's on the spot PCR testing going on in the airport. So you get a test 72 hours before, and then when you arrive at the airport, you have to have another test. And then when that comes back negative, it's a faster turnaround. I think it's an hour or 2 hours. You get your positive, you get a result whether it's negative or positive. And I think that's, again, another safeguard in place to protect Britain and other countries. So if somebody's traveling from Pakistan, let's just say it's going via Dubai and then coming here, they'll be tested in Dubai and they'll be tested in Pakistan and they'll be tested twice. So they have 3 tests before they even arrive in the UK and then get their day 2 test and day 8 test, if that's what it is.
Councillor Shaukat Saab?
I was just going to say, if all things were equal, if you remember back in the Cold War, if you remember, embassy staff used to be sent home. So the British would send Russians home, the Russians would send British home. And that went on. So if all things were equal, Pakistan would do the same. They'd say, like, if anybody come from England, they'd have to go on quarantine and pay 10 lakh rupees to hide for the hotel. But unfortunately, they're not the same. And Pakistani actually relies heavily on the Pakistani diaspora here in England to be part of their economy. The money we take there or send there or spend there. So they obviously are the lesser partner, if you will. They would have to try that much harder to prove why that red list is not the red list. So the onus is on Pakistan to prove that. Because to be honest with you, the English or the UK government aren't really bothered. So if the Pakistanis don't want to provide data, I don't think they're going to go out pitching for it. So I think it's the Pakistanis who've got, and this is a golden opportunity because the Pakistanis have been helping out in Afghanistan to get the civilians out from, I think it was 20 different countries. They've been laying planes on 300 and some planes have actually gone to Afghanistan to get all these people out of there. So, if anything, there's a strong case now to be made. Say, hang on, this is what we've done. It's about time you give us a bit of leeway here.
Okay, thank you for that. So as a final point then, as a final question I'd like to ask both you distinguished gentlemen, is that I think the next review is on the 16th of September. So we'd like to know if you think that Pakistan will be on or off the red list. And also I'd like to ask a question on that.
Sorry, we've lost you.
I can't hear you. Skill. I can't hear you.
We can't hear you. So I think whilst you sound your sound out, shall I just try to answer that? I don't know if everybody can hear me, but
I can.
So 16th of September is the next review. At the moment, it looks highly unlikely that Pakistan will be lifted out of the red list, just because, as we said earlier, if you look at the positive rate in Pakistan, it's relatively going up, and the deaths are going up. You talked about Azad Kashmir and the elections that happened in July. They seem to have peaked in Azad Kashmir, but again, the decision that's been made by the British government is on a Pakistan-wide basis and their jurisdiction. So I think that will be an area to monitor. And what we've got to see is a downward spiral of positive cases before Pakistan is considered to be released into the amber list. So I'm hoping and praying, because I'm going to, usually go to Pakistan every October, so I'm kind of praying that we do. But again, it's entirely up to Pakistan to see how that rate comes and how does it come down, and is it consistently coming down, and have they reached their peak? And remember the Delta variant, which has wreaked havoc here in the UK, where 98% of the positive cases here in the UK are now the Delta variant, which is brought in from India. In Pakistan, it's slightly different because there is no border open between India and Pakistan. So there's nobody coming in from India. It's come from outside Pakistan, via the Middle East countries. And so people stranded in Pakistan have now got a way out. Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, Bahrain Airways, Kuwaiti Airways, they're all out of the red list for the UK. And so, if people wanted to come back, they could test negative, and as long as they were testing negative, the 72 hours before at the airport as well, in Islamabad, for example, and then arrival in, say, let's say Dubai, if they're fully vaccinated, they'll then be able to stay in Dubai for 11 days, have a bit of a holiday, relax, and then come back to the UK, and they won't have to quarantine.
Okay, thank you for that, Brother Mohammad Shafiq. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah.
Slight technical hitch there, so I do apologise to all our viewers for that. Sorry, Councillor Shaukat Sahab.
I was just going to say, just like Shafiq said, ideally, I hope it comes out on the red list. I've actually got my ticket booked in October.
In October?
Originally, I was going in February, and I delayed it. Hopefully, in October will be fine. But if I'm going to be realistic, I can't see it. I can't see it happening. If the spiral's going upwards, I can't see it coming down.
Sorry to interject there. The only other positive thing is what's going on in Afghanistan. Pakistan is now a key partner. It's a key route out of, and I think that is something which we can. Yeah, I just think in terms of COVID, in terms of getting out of the red list, it's a really good positive case. Pakistan has been helping the international community. The European Union, for example, which banned PIA flights from entering European airspace, it's the very same PIA planes that have been evacuating European citizens. And so you've seen the Dutch foreign minister was in Pakistan yesterday. You've seen the Austrian foreign minister in conversation, the Canadian foreign minister. Lots of international leaders now recognize that Pakistan is a key partner in that. And I think if Pakistan used that diplomatic power to its advantage, I think that might help us to get out of the red list.
Thank you for that, gentlemen. You almost took over my show there, but I appreciate that nonetheless. So moving on to Afghanistan, another very crucial subject to discuss, and something that really baffles me too is the fact that how have the Taliban taken over Afghanistan so quickly in just literally a number of weeks, a country that had been occupied by the American forces, say, and the British for many, many years. And, within a number of weeks, it's been taken over by obviously the Taliban. What would you say to that? Brother Mohammad Shafiq, sorry.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I would say, first of all, I think we've got to reflect on where we are, how we got here. So in 2001, September the 11th, 20 years ago, one of the most appalling terrorist attacks the world has seen. 3,000 people were brutally killed. The Taliban were given an opportunity to hand over the culprits, according to the international community, who were responsible for that. This was Al-Qaeda. They refused to do that, and then military action followed that. But the neoconservative agenda wasn't about justice. It was about regime change. So we know that George W. Bush and Tony Blair wanted to have a regime change. And one of the key mistakes they made, they labeled the Taliban as an external threat to Afghanistan. For 20 years, they ignored the Taliban. They didn't engage with the Taliban. And then in recent years, in the last 5-6 years, they suddenly decided that they couldn't end the war. They couldn't see Afghanistan at peace without the Taliban being a key partner in those discussions. You had an Indian foreign policy, which was about keeping the Taliban at bay and using Afghanistan as a platform to attack Pakistan and have terrorism in Pakistan territory. Same allegation towards India from the Pakistani side as well. And I think that's the key mistake the international community make. For too long, it ignored the Taliban. The Taliban were able to grow. There was massive corruption. Just imagine this, Shak. $2 trillion was spent in Afghanistan by the international community. $2 trillion over them 20 years. And where's that money gone? The president, Ashraf Ghani, and other official leaders fled the country, with their offshore accounts and whatever else. And so the international community kind of failed. People were fed up of the corruption. They're not big fans of the Taliban. Let's be honest. The Taliban's record on human rights, record of governance isn't very, very good. But they're a more mature force now. They've learned that if they want to succeed in governing Afghanistan, as they will do in the weeks and months to come, they have to have international legitimacy. They've got to recognize human rights. They've got to recognize the right of women. In Islam, the rights of women are absolute, and you can't ignore that. And I think having a global viewpoint is what we need to see. And finally, this point, which I think is really, really important. For this to succeed, Afghanistan has to have an inclusive government that represents all the ethnicities, all the religious groups and the Muslims and firqas. And if it's just one group of people running the country, then you'll see that civil war go on. And people are really tired. 40 years of civil war and violence and occupation, and people wanted to see an end to it.
Thank you for that. And before we come on to Councillor Shaukat Saab, just a question here that one of our viewers has stated is the fact that it says that the Taliban offered Osama bin Laden to the US via a third party and the US refused. Do you think that has any take on it?
No, that's not factually correct. If you look at the history books, the United States, through the international community of the United Nations, again, I was not a supporter. I was 18 when September 11th happened. I was never a supporter of this foreign intervention into any country. But the United Nations asked the Taliban government to, give up Osama bin Laden. The Saudi Arabian government asked to give Osama bin Laden up. They said to the Taliban, because remember, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Pakistan were the only three countries that recognized the Taliban rule between 1996 and 2001. And so I think that's factually correct. If you go back through the history books, it was the Taliban that refused and said they wouldn't give up somebody who was a guest in their country. And that then led on to the military action and the foreign interventions we've seen. And then the other aspect to remember here was the neoconservatives in the White House, led by George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, John Bolton, and Donald Rumsfeld, they weren't interested in Afghanistan at that point. That was a stepping stone to having military action in Iraq and a legal war that we saw. So 2001, you could argue on an international basis, the Afghanistan war was legitimate because they were responding to what happened on September 11th. But you couldn't argue the same when they turned their focus away from Afghanistan to Iraq. And that had deadly consequences as well.
Thank you for that, Brother Mohammad Shafiq. Councillor Shaukat.
I'm just going to say a lot of what Shafiq said, but the fact is you cannot force democracy in any country. It just has to come within. So this regime change that they wanted was never going to happen. It wasn't just about religion, it was about culture. So if you remember back all them years ago, they were talking about women weren't forced to wear niqabs. The truth is, there's a lot more women who wear niqabs now than they did all them years ago. Not just in Afghanistan, all over the world, because it actually pushed a lot of people back to their religion. So I don't think they achieved anything. We should never ever have been there for 20 years. If there was something to terrorist camps that they wanted to destroy, a year or two, they should have been out of there. To actually sort of spend them trillions amount of money. And there's other people who made a lot of money out of that. There's people who flying the arms who made millions of pounds out of this. So there's a lot of other stuff that's gone on here, other than just trying to get the Taliban out. And the Taliban, like Shafiq said, they've got a lot stronger. And the Russians tried 20 years prior to that, and they never succeeded either. So there was never ever a plan B. There was no exit strategy. They had nothing. They just went in hoping for the best, and they got stuck in there. And in the end, like all wars, the only way you're going to end them is by sitting down the table. That's what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. From presidents to prime ministers, the amount of money that these guys have made on a personal level through these atrocities would go into the millions. But that's a topic, I guess, for another day. Councillor Shaukat Saab, I'd like to ask: is the Blackburn Council doing anything for the Afghan refugees at the moment, and what's the update on that from a Blackburn point of view?
We as Blackburn Council have a proud record of helping whenever refugees have come over. We've always welcomed them. Now we've said we'll take our share if the government was to allow them to come. So it's not just Blackburn. Burnley have done the same. Pendle have done the same. So and Manchester definitely. And so if we more than happy to accept our fair share.
And do we have a number or an expectation of how many refugees will come into any of these areas?
I don't have a number, and up to now, a couple of days ago, we didn't have any put forward. But we've said that if there was some, we'd take them.
So we've got 15,000, Shak. We've got 15,000 refugees that have come over. And there's a debate around why do you call them refugees? Because obviously if you're refugees, there's the Geneva Convention, International Human Rights Convention, and other particles around that. But these were people who were working for the British government. And so the British government have a moral duty to provide for these refugees. Operation Warm Welcome is what the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, announced yesterday, is their big plan. And obviously local authorities are saying, we're ready to help, but you've got to put the money into it. You know, just providing £3 million is not good enough. That's not going to help. So, for example, we know in Manchester is housing about 800 of those 15,000. They're out scattered in a lot of the hotels at the moment in quarantine. That quarantine cost has to be paid by the Home Office. And then there has to be a plan. How do we get housing for these permanent housing? Looking at hospital and the NHS, treatment facilities, then education. We're coming to the new school year starting next week. You know, how do we integrate those children into schools and then deal with the post-traumatic stress disorder and the violence from that? And so there's an expectation local authorities should be doing it, but they can't do that without having the resources for that. And that's what the problem is. This government's very good. The Tories are very good at, pitching an idea, making announcements, but not putting money where their mouth is. And I think that's the key thing here. This is something which the British government is responsible for, because for the last 20 years, they've been in Afghanistan. They've supported a government that's been corrupt. They've had these people who've supported their activity there. And we've got a moral and legal duty to support them. And whatever the cost, we should support them. And we as Muslims in this country, regardless of whether we support the Taliban or whether you support the opposition or people like me who think they're as bad as each other, this is human beings, fellow members of our ummah, and we're all one ummah. And when one of us feels pain, we should all help them. And I think that's really important.
Thank you for that. So do you think all of this could have been avoided? Like, we've got a viewer on, Sam says it's pretty much the same with the Iraq issue. So do you think massive lessons, like you said, Brother Mohammad Shafiq, that over the 20 years, with Iraq and Kuwait and Libya, and the list will go on, no doubt, do you think that this could have been avoided? Because 15,000, for example, for a city like Manchester is a massive, massive number.
Yeah, sorry, I just correct you there. It's 15,000 to the UK that have arrived. It's all in the evacuation, of which I think about 700-800 are in Manchester because of quarantine reasons, and lots in Birmingham, lots in London. Local authorities are kind of stepping up that. I think the point was 2011. Osama bin Laden is killed in Pakistan, in Abbottabad, and that's a moment when you could argue that justice has finally been achieved for the victims. I would argue that he should have been put on trial at the International Criminal Court and held to account for his crimes rather than being executed in the way that he was. But that's a separate debate. But you're right. And I think the other part that we don't understand here is, where's your forward planning? We've known for at least 2 years since Donald Trump met the Taliban and made that deal, that that the foreign forces were going to leave in 2021. So where's that forward planning? Why weren't the people who were helping British forces, why weren't they evacuated sooner? Why did they leave it until the moment that the Taliban take over? And then you have this mad dash. And there's lots of questions that Dominic Raab faced yesterday in the House of Commons at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He was questioned by MPs on that. There was no forward plan, and they paid a very heavy price for that, politically and economically, and morally, I would argue.
But would you say, I mean, just as another question, firstly, I want to ask about this new group called ISIS-K, which has just appeared out of nowhere and obviously is now operating in Afghanistan. But on the back of, you talk about Osama bin Laden, Brother Mohammad Shafiq, and him being killed in Abbottabad, if that was the case. Do you think justice was served then? Because obviously, throughout that period, we've had other radical groups now appearing. No doubt they'll have leaders who will have probably the same intentions, if not worse.
Yeah, I mean, look, the American foreign policy was about kill. It wasn't about putting these people on trial. And if you believe in a justice system, if you believe in rights, now, in this country, I'll give you an example. The people that were responsible for killing Aya Hashim in Blackburn, as appalling and abhorrent as that crime was, everybody would agree that the culprits, the murderers, had a right to a fair trial, were innocent until proven guilty. Now, the evidence against Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda is very, very strong. It comes from their own mouths. They readily admitted that they carried out terrorism, which is an affront to our faith, Islam. But again, they should have been put on trial. They should have been held to account in a court of law for their crimes and put away behind bars for the rest of their life. And that didn't happen. And I think that, again, is one of the consequences of a superpower, in this case, the United States, which thinks, one, it doesn't abide by international law. Two, it's not really bothered about justice. It's just interested in taking out the people that they claim are responsible for crimes. And I think that's just not the way we should do things. We should put them on trial and hold them to account for their crimes.
Thank you, Mohammad Shafiq. Councillor Shaukat, I've got a question for you. So on the back of this and with this new group, ISIS-K, do you think we will be much safer from the sort of regime change in Afghanistan going forward?
I think, as Mohammad Shafiq said earlier, I think Taliban are a lot wiser now, and they realize that they need to change if they're going to be accepted by the international community. So I think, quite rightly so, they're going to wash their hands of any terrorism. They've already made an announcement that they won't be knowingly host any terrorist camps over there or helping any terrorist organizations. So I think it's in their benefit to work with the international community to get recognized and build a stronger future for Afghanistan.
Okay, and great answer. Thank you for that, Councillor Shaukat. And another question for you then. Why is the West and India, for example, blaming Pakistan for what's going on in Afghanistan?
Well, the Indians have historically always tried to blame Pakistan for every terrorist threat round there. And if you talk to the Pakistani politicians, they'll tell you that India has been helping some Afghanistan's Talibans or Pashtuns who've been bombing in Pakistan. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other, and that'll never go away. They're always blaming each other. Kashmir isn't a hot, topic. India's always blamed Pakistan for helping the Kashmiris and vice versa.
Thank you for that. And so on a last note from myself, if I can ask you first again, Councillor Shaukat, what do you perceive that will happen from here then? Civil war, or do you think they'll form an inclusive government that the world will be happy with and will be willing to cooperate with? I mean, we've seen, for example, the old regime in Afghanistan and how they mustered away from the current situation with millions in vans and offshore accounts and things. How do you think we're going to fare going forward?
As Shafiq said, that was what they, inverted commas, called the puppet government. That was a government that was put in place. They're the ones who run away at first call. If you're the president of a country, you should be the last person leaving people. In this case, they left with suitcases full of dollars. And the fact that it folded within hours was, testament to the Taliban, really. But it seems it's all in the hands of the Taliban. I think they need to work hard and be accepted in the international community. So they'll be welcoming people to come and watch and oversee stuff, because they've already said they'll allow girls to go to school. I'm not sure how true it was that they were stopping them. They allow women to work if they wish, but within the Islamic law, which that was always the case as far as I was concerned. But like I said, the international community will be watching them carefully.
Very closely, I hope. Very closely. Mohammad Shafiq, and yourself, the same question, sir?
Well, I think people are tired. The Afghans I speak to, the journalists I speak to on a regular basis, the country's tired. People just want peace. They want the war to end. They want the occupation. They wanted foreign forces out, and they want Afghanistan to be run by Afghans. And the imperative is now for Afghanistan and Taliban in particular, as the incoming government, to make sure that that government is inclusive, as I said earlier, of all ethnicities or all groups, and ensures that women are represented in that government. We've already seen in some of those cities, schools reopen, girls are going to school again. I don't know what it's going to be like in weeks and months to come, but at the moment, as we speak, there's propaganda out there to say schools are closed. But from what I've seen and the journalists I speak to on the ground, we know that schools are open. But again, you talked about, if I can pick up two quick points, one about ISIS-K. They appeared around the same time that the Taliban fell out with a group of people, and the ISIS-K was created in Afghanistan and has been responsible for terrorist attacks, which even the Taliban has condemned, which is the irony of a government, military movement like the Taliban, who were involved in terrorism themselves in Afghanistan, now condemning ISIS-K, for the terrorism. But I think, as I said, people are really, really tired. They want peace. They want to be able to live in a country where there isn't terrorism. And I think that's really, really important. And what the international community now need to do, they need to step back and allow the Afghans to determine their own future. Stop that interference. I think that an Afghan-led process is really, really important. And for all of us here in the UK, in Blackburn, around the country, we can have these political conversations, but at the end, there's a humanitarian catastrophe happening here in the UK. The far right are now mobilizing against these Afghan refugees. And it's the good people, the trade unionists, the people on the left, Stand Up to Racism, Hope Not Hate, groups on the ground, refugee groups, anti-racist groups, who are predominantly white people. Let's be honest, Shak. They're white people. We sit in the comfort of our own home. We sit on social media and we say our thing and we think that's enough. These people are out there fundraising for them, getting goods and food and essentials gathered so that they can be protected. And then we've got to help support them, whatever our views. And I've got really strong views about Afghanistan because of their anti-Pakistan agenda, in which they perpetuated the narrative of India, the slogans of India against Pakistan. But having said that, I would still want to be on the front line defending these refugees against the threat from the far right, which is increasing day by day.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate, and it has been an honour and a privilege to be hosting a show with yourself, Brother Mohammad Shafiq.
I'm glad we got through that. I was quite nervous.
I really appreciate it. We can only hope and pray that God allows us, like you both said, to live in happiness, prosperity, love, and respect, and most importantly, peace. Where our children, we're not feared of our children going to sleep and not waking up the next morning. So God bless you and thank you for your time, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. To all you amazing viewers who have voiced concerns and opinions on the Real Talk Blackburn, we thank you for taking the time out also. And hopefully, inshallah, we will see you soon. God bless you. Love and peace.
Allah Hafiz.